Good evening. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop Vanessa M. Brown, and I am your host and moderator for this evening. We are so excited to have you here with us. We have an exciting show, so many things that we want to discuss, but we want to make sure that you all are checked in. So tell us where you are watching from on tonight. We want you to shout it out and let us know where you are watching us on tonight. I see you all have already come in. I'm excited. We're so grateful for your presence tonight. Let me just start saying Chuck Hunt is here from Monroe, Louisiana. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I see Albert Reed from Colleen, Texas. Sean Jenkins from Atlanta. And Reverend Garrett Ganosho from Louisiana. Oh, Pastor Wilford Morris here. Bless you. Las Vegas is in the house. Pastor Sigrid Benton. Bless you, Pastor. Temple Hills, Maryland is here. Lay Pastor Ronnie Jordan is here. Rancho Cucamonga, California. Elder Sharon Gill is here. East Coast is representing. C. Wilson, Toronto, Canada. Reginald Nichols from Stockton, California. Come on YouTube. Thank you for being here, C. Wilson. Again, our Facebook Live audience, our YouTube audience is here. We are on LinkedIn as well. You can go to Sue Webley's page to find us. We are also on Twitter. So, like Spotify, this is a conversation that you all need to be listening to, particularly what's going on in the world today. I see you, Reverend Kimmy Floyd Reich. Thank you. Santa Fe, New Mexico is in the house. Leo is here. Sister Leo is here. Brooklyn, New York. Good evening. Reverend Pastor Karen Coleman, Boston, Massachusetts, is here with us on tonight. So many of you, do me a big favor. You want to share this conversation that we're about to have, this discussion, please, on all social media platforms. Bring your family in, bring your siblings, and bring your folks that come to church. Let some of your colleagues know. Reverend Tanya Jackson, thank you for being here tonight. Newark, Delaware is representing. So many people are still yet representing. I want you in on this conversation. I know you saw the flyer, so you already know what we're going to talk about, but we want to make sure that we can get enough people here watching us and paying attention to what this conversation is going to be about. Good to see you, Renee Vickers. So glad that you're here with us on tonight. We appreciate you. Want to make sure that we're sharing this conversation because, we need to have this conversation with family and friends. Thank you, Darlene Pittman Connell from Queens, New York. So glad that you're joining us on this evening. And again, we're on Facebook Live. You can find us on Bishop Yvette Flunder's page, but of course, Beyond the Gatekeepers has its own page. You can also go there and be a part of the conversation. I am looking forward to all of you all joining us in this conversation on tonight. Want to just continue to shout out all of those who are joining us on tonight on whatever social media platform that you're joining us on. Tonight promises to be a wonderful conversation, a robust conversation, a very needed and necessary conversation for the climate and time that we are living in. We're so grateful to see Lewis Eaton. Thank you for joining us, Boston, Massachusetts. Come on, make sure that you tell somebody else that we're here and that we're on. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to be a part of this conversation on tonight. And so without any further ado, let me go on to the business at hand. This is, I want to introduce to you, first and foremost, no introduction is necessary because she has been with us all this time, right? And helping us to facilitate these conversations and to add some weight to the conversations that we've been having for the last, I guess, 4 years now. And so we are grateful to have Bishop Yvette Adrian Flunder on with us. She's the presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries and the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ. And so, Bishop Flunder, we're so glad to have you here tonight.
It is, of course, my joy and my privilege to be both with my daughter in the work of ministry, Bishop Vanessa M. Brown, and that powerful woman of God who's making all this possible in the background, yes. Pastor Sue Webley Scott, Pastor Sue Webley, Pastor Sue. We are so grateful for her presence and to be in conversation with what I have come to be called a reforming conservative. To be in conversation with somebody who, like myself, has a history and a background and has to, in the present atmosphere, determine what saith God.
What saith God?
What is the word of God in this time? And then pay the price for it. I am so excited about this conversation and all of what will happen and the responses and the input that will come from our audience. Put something in the chat, put something down. If you have some thoughts and ideas, it is time for us to get together and begin to deal with these issues. God bless you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. And of course, I see you, Pastor Victoria. Thank you for joining us. I'm asking everyone to do me a favor, make sure that we share this conversation tonight. We have a brother who's been here with us before. He is not a stranger to this particular platform. We are so grateful for Dr. Robert P. Jones, PhD. He's the president and founder of Public Religion Research Institute. He's got a new book. Okay. Now, let me just tell you first, if you haven't read any of his books, one of the last books he did was White Too Long. Come on. So he is, telling us where the rubber meets the road, and he continues to do that and continues to be one of those crying out loud about this particular topic. So here we are with his new book, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future. Robert Jones, brother Robert Jones, do us a favor and greet our audience on social media on tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I am so happy to be here. Happy to be back. I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have tonight. So thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad that you're here, and I want to just hit the ground running if I can.
Yeah.
Just in the first few chapters, you get right into it. And you don't waste any time in terms of your direction. And so for the audience's sake, those that don't have the book yet, we want to make sure that you can get the book, make sure that you purchase the book. But we are going to give away a book tonight at some point as well, courtesy of Robert Jones. A free book giveaway. Make sure you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. So that's something we want you to know up front. We want to also make sure that if you have questions as it relates to this topic, that you're going to put your question first, because I realize that we've not been getting all the questions, right? So we want to make sure that we get to you, but we want to also make sure that we ask the questions needed to guide this particular conversation. And so, Robert, let's just talk about how you start off with the book. One of the things that I read is that you talk a lot about the 1619 Project. And I want to ask you why you make mention of the 1619 Project in this book.
Well, I think we're all well aware of the firestorm that project set off when it challenged, right, this simple idea of that the story of America began with a bunch of white guys in a room in Philadelphia with their quill pens, right? That was in 1776. That was
Right.
the beginning of America. And so the real challenge was to say, well, hold on, let's back up a minute here. There's a whole lot of history that happens before that. And so, if you think about, we can talk theological a little bit here, theologically here. All the time when we are in the beginnings, right, of our origin stories, determine what we have to account for in the rest of the story, right? And so they're vitally important to us. So if we begin, if the story of America begins with a bunch of white guys in a room in Philadelphia, that's limits what we really have to account for, right? And the whole story of who we are, how we got here. And I think one of the real, the really Herculean efforts and huge contributions that the 1619 Project did for us was to dislodge that idea, right? And to widen the aperture, right? And to say, look, that's not the origin story of America. We really have to back up here to kind of understand. And so what's in that image, if you remember the New York Times, where it originally, before it was a book, before it was a movement, it was kind of this special issue in the New York Times Sunday edition. And the image there was actually a vast ocean, right? And it was a ship coming to land in the British colonies in 1619. And on that ship are African people had been kidnapped from their homes and taken to the British colonies and were destined to be enslaved in the British colonies. And so if we begin our story there, right, that's a very different things that we have to account for and who we are and how we got here. So I think that's such a huge thing. What I'm arguing in this book is that we should maybe take one more step back and widen the aperture a little bit more,
because it's not the whole story,
and that even that is not the whole story, right? And I'm arguing that because one of the things that doesn't quite fit into that frame is the story of the European encounter with indigenous people, which had a century of encounter even before 1619. So in the book, I'm not trying to make a magic date out of this, but we have to go back at least, I'm arguing, to 1493, which is the year that Columbus goes back after not landing in the United States, but in the Americas, and goes back and asks for more missionaries, more troops, more money, and ships, and he asks something from the church.
Because this is to stop you, because you're going right where I'm going next.
Yeah.
This is the papal bull that you're speaking about, Inter Caetera, right? Issued by Pope Alexander VI in May 1493. I want you to give us some of the salient points of that papal bull, because I think that it helps to create the foundation for the direction that we're going in.
Yeah. Well, let me first give credit where credit is due. And with a confession too, that so I've got a PhD in religion, took a lot of religious history courses. I have a seminary degree, and nowhere in my education did I get taught about the significance of the Doctrine of Discovery. Like, it was just not in my educational, repertoire.
Mine's either. Nobody said a word about it. Now, I heard about what they did to the indigenous Indians, but I never heard about the Doctrine of Discovery. So,
yeah. So, it really came up for me as I was doing research and reading indigenous scholars, right, who have, in fact, been railing about this for half a century. Like, there's this heartbreaking letter by a Native American scholar called Vine Deloria Jr., who wrote this great book called Custer Died for Your Sins, Indian Manifesto. But he also wrote this thing in 1972. He wrote an open letter to the Christian churches of North America, where he was saying, like, look, from an indigenous perspective, you all have got some things to answer for, right, that you've never answered for. And he really says, look, I'm asking you is to give a more honest accounting of how we got here. And that's really, it's a beautiful piece of writing, but it really went nowhere. It was largely ignored by particularly predominantly white denominations in the 1970s. And so there have been indigenous scholars pointing to this. I'm certainly not the one to trip upon it I tripped upon it because they've been highlighting it. But essentially what it says, it was actually a series of papal bulls that got put out by the head of the Western Christian Church in the 15th century. So starting in 1452 and then up to 1493. And the reason why they issued these, it's a theological conundrum, right? What to do with these people that they've encountered on lands that they didn't know existed, right? So it's very clear what the political powers want to do, right? They want to exploit those people and those lands for economic benefit. But who do they turn to the church to, because they need a moral mandate for what they're doing. And it is the Christian church here. And just in case there's any Protestants ready to kind of point the finger at the Catholics here, just a reminder, this is before the Protestant Catholic split in the Western Christian Church. Is before the break with the Church of England, right? So all of Western Christianity here is like looking to the Pope in Rome for religious authority. But essentially what they come up with a theological logic. And the logic is fairly straightforward, actually. I mean, it's all, very sophisticated, and it's written in Latin and all of that stuff. But it really boils down to this. If the people that they encountered on these lands were not Christian, that was the defining characteristic to whether they deserved human rights or not. If they were not Christian, they could be considered, and this is the language in the document, enemies of Christ. And it just spelled it out. Then if they are enemies of Christ, then if you were sailing under the flag of a, quote unquote Christian European nation, you had the right then to occupy their lands, to steal their goods. And then this language, which is right out of the documents, and to and to submit their persons to perpetual slavery, right? That is word for word out of these papal documents. And so I think one thing I'm trying to do in the book is take that seriously, right? And so what does that mean? That this is the version of Christianity that lands on these shores from Europe, that governs not only the treatment of African people, but the treatment of indigenous people here. And it helps, I think, see the linkages between those two histories that are often kept in silos, right? Indigenous history or African-American history. And you begin to see the through line here, and particularly with the violence and the injustice, its through line is European Christianity.
Thank you for that so much. I want to read something, and I'm going to bring Bishop Flunder in. But I want to say to Rhonda, Brittany, Rebecca, Cheryl, Minister Sandy Hudson, good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. So this is very important. It's only on page 17. That's why I said you just hit the ground running when you start this book. But it says to find, discover, and investigate whatsoever islands, countries, regions, or provinces of heathens, that's what they call them, and infidels, and whatsoever part of the world placed, which before this time were unknown to all Christians. We have also given license to set up our aforesaid banners and ensigns in any town, city, castle, island, or mainland whatsoever, newly found by them. And that the before mentioned John and his sons, talking about John Cabot and his sons, or their heirs and deputies may conquer, listen to these words, occupy, and possess whatsoever such towns, castles, cities, and islands by them thus discovered. That's what they said, and that's what they did. Bishop Flunder.
And they obeyed the Bible when they did it, which is the true conundrum.
It's painful. I mean, for someone who grew up in the church, I mean, it is quite something. I mean, and one of the things that made me rethink is, we've all seen those paintings, right, of the kind of European discoverers, right? And what's always in those paintings, right? They're planting stuff in the ground. They're planting a flag in the ground, and in many of them, they're planting a cross in the ground. And I think I always saw that in a kind of benign way that, okay, they're planting a cross and maybe they're having a worship service to thank God for a safe voyage or something like that, right? But these were actually parts of it. They were rituals of legal claims that they were making against the people who lived there. They were when they stood that crucifix up in the indigenous village, they were literally staking a legal claim to their land under the authority of the king and the queen and the pope.
Which is precisely what is happening politically and literally, or there's an effort to do the same thing again. It's not new news. It's what I think that the pushback, which is, as we have been talking on several weeks and months now about this, the pushback is they came to that conclusion by their reading of the text. And we've talked about it many times about the story of Moses. When you come out of captivity, and this is really tough, again, because the Moses story is a liberation story for many African Americans.
That's right.
And when you come out of Egypt, you go and possess the land. Yeah. And if anybody gets in your way, you possess the people. If you cannot possess the people, you destroy them.
Well, yeah, the text tells us to kill everything.
Kill everything.
The Old Testament is full of kill everything, kill everybody and everything, every animal, every child, all the villages, everybody, just kill everything and then take over.
And you can make God angry if you don't. If you don't kill everything, if they can hear something in the background still talking or still mooing, or whatever, you haven't killed everything. You can fall into the lap of an angry God if you do that. And basically, that understanding from the text, the manifest destiny realities that are connected with that, is the heart and soul of Christianity. Yeah. And it's painful. Everything in me, I say it all the time, everything that I am was in some way abused. My native self, my Scottish self, and my African self.
Right.
Have all been abused in some way by the church. I think the real fundamental question for me and for us is, what are we going to do about this?
Right.
We have identified it, and you have done it so skillfully.
He has.
You've done it so skillfully. It's so clear. It's such an understanding of what is happening right this moment.
It is.
People feel justified, fully justified And I want to say it, I want to go back again to the coronation of the new King of England, that with all of the multiple millions of dollars that was spent on that day for that coronation, not one time did anybody say, now let's give the people their diamonds back. Let's give the people back the trinkets that we took. Let's release any obligation that any of these people have when the sun wasn't setting on England anywhere, because it was everywhere. What are we going to do? None of that happened. In all of that pomp and circumstance. And I think the bottom line is, what are we going to do as people who say we are people of God to bring justice and righteousness to what we experienced? And what are we going to do with those parts of the text that we keep going back and using as a fodder to keep making and justifying what it is that is happening? That is the time that we are in. And I hear you, Brother Robert, and I thank God for you writing about it.
And Robert, you break this book down into 4 parts, but we'll talk about, and we have to get to the fourth part, because the fourth part gives us hope. But the first 3 parts, you start part 1, you talk about the Delta. So you get us there. First you go into, if those are, first of all, buy the book, people. He's got a prologue. It's all about before America, right? Because before America, there was always something before America. That's the thing we need to know. Okay. So now we got part 1, the Delta. You hit before Mississippi. You hit the murder of Emmett Till. You hit the commemoration and repair in Mississippi. Tell us about that.
Well, Mississippi is my home state. I grew up in Jackson. Grew up Southern Baptist in Jackson. I went to a Southern Baptist college and a Southern Baptist seminary. So I am deep, deep in that world. So part of this was a journey back there to really see what's going on in the state today. And in particular, and again, just to kind of, we've had such a, the word I think I've used a lot is willful amnesia, right? On the part of particularly people who look like me, right? Because we don't want to know the really troubling parts of this history that we've already been talking about, right?
Which is why we've got critical race theory.
That's right. Yeah. So these denials, this willful amnesia is about protecting the present by obscuring the past, right? And that's really what we're about here. But I want to go back because, and again, to kind of make this like really clear. So I went to public school in Jackson, Mississippi, all the way up, graduated at the top of my class, my senior year of high school. And if you had asked me who Emmett Till was, I'm not sure I could have told you. And I sure couldn't have told you anything substantive about it. I know for sure if you had asked me who Medgar Evers was, and Medgar Evers was gunned down 9 miles from my driveway growing up in Jackson, right? No idea, who he was, and what was Evers doing when he was gunned down? He was trying to integrate white churches in Jackson, Mississippi. That's the last thing he was doing, was organizing efforts to integrate the churches. And who gunned him down? It was a white Episcopalian who gunned him down, right? Who had been writing letters to the editor up in the Delta, saying if any non-white person comes to our good Episcopalian church in the Delta, I'll be waiting on the steps with a gun. And so it's this person living out of this Doctrine of Discovery, white supremacist version of Christianity, right? That was rife. So I want to kind of tell the story. And it's also true that if you've gone to the Delta as late as like 1999, people all over the world know Emmett Till's story. But if you've gone to Tallahatchie County, in the county that happened in 1989, and drove around, there was absolutely nothing marking this history in the county that happened. And so this group of people got together and began to say, like, we can't move forward as a community until we tell the truth about what happened here. We can't sweep this under the rug. And, it's a very rural, actually fairly impoverished counties, not a lot of resources. But this group of people, and they were descendants of enslavers and descendants of enslaved people that got together. And these are people like, who know each other's great grandparents, right? So know what happened in this very fraught history here, and yet they found ways to come together and to begin to tell the story there. And after 20 years of working on this, there's now markers that you can go on a tour there to kind of tell the story of what happened at the local level. They have restored the courthouse where this awful trial took place, acquitting his killers who later confessed. And then, I live in DC, and I had the privilege of going just last month to the reception where the culmination of their work has resulted now in a new national monument. That's going to be the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument that President Biden just signed into law. I'll end with this one word from Vice President Kamala Harris. She spoke there at the event, and she just had these stirring words to say, which I think reflect the whole spirit of that effort. And she said, let us not be seduced into thinking we will be better if we forget.
That's right.
We will be better if we remember. We will be stronger if we remember. And I think that's really the foundation of, what's happening at the local level, but the foundation of the fights, that we're seeing even at the national level.
So these are the hidden roots of white supremacy that need to be revealed, right? All of these stories, all of these things that people are trying to hide. They don't want to tell the truth about it. They don't want to teach our kids in school about the history of America, the history before America, the history of America, and what all America has done, because these kids are smart now, right? And it doesn't sit well with them. That's why they want to take it out. These kids that are black, that are white, as Bishop calls them, cafe au lait, all of these, they don't want to hear the craziness, right? They don't want you to make excuses for the damage that has been done. And the kids need to know the truth. You have schools that are not teaching social studies to fifth graders. The kids don't have social studies in fifth grade. I don't understand. I don't understand where our nation is going. Well, I do understand, and I see what's going, and I see where it's going. I'm so glad that you have brought this up to us on today through this book, and I want to encourage you all to purchase the book, to make sure that you get it. It can be really, honestly, you can use this book, since they want to take history out of the school. You can actually use this book to teach your children.
Yes.
Bishop?
Yes and amen. And I want to encourage, I want to roll back a minute and say to Bishop Vanessa, absolutely. Absolutely. Just in the last few weeks and months, we've been having some conversations and received some funding to do exactly what it is that you're talking about. If they won't teach your children in the school, you teach them at home. Why is it so incredibly important? It is incredibly important because there are people right now, in terms of the making of returning to what was our history, that will buy you a sandwich, will buy you a car, will perhaps buy you a house. Anything to somehow suggest that you forget what the history of this nation really is. Just anything. And I'm watching it happen and want you to be grateful for what it is let's just not bring this up anymore. But giving gifts is not the same thing as acknowledging and repenting. There has to be an acknowledgement, and it can't be continually swept under the floor. Acknowledging and repenting is not saying I'm sorry. Repenting, involved in the concept of repentance, is shifting and changing from who we were, who they were, who was doing what was done, and profiting from that, which means that a number of people will have to divest. This is the problem. If we level the playing field, if we do right, if repentance becomes an action word, there are people that will have to divest their funds, their heritage. They will have to level the playing field. And we say that is not democracy. That's what we say. We say that is in some way communist or socialist in some way.
Yes, yes.
But the truth of the matter is, it's much more holiness in socialism than it is in the ways in which this nation has stolen and then makes those that were stolen from not only victims, but make them responsible in some way. Right now, the House is having an issue about funding right now.
Mm-hmm.
And who
They're
they
trying to
want
shut the government down.
Who do they want to defund, Bishop Vanessa?
Yeah.
Who are the people that will struggle the most? Let's just be clear. It will be the poor. It will be the underserved. It will be disproportionately people of color. It will be disproportionately women, especially unmarried women, but also a huge number of extremely poor white folks. Probably the largest number will be that number.
Yeah.
Simply because the real heart of this is to allow the rich to get richer.
Yes.
And the poor to stay as poor as they need to, because you're poor because it's your fault. That is the reality of the time that we are in. So forgive me for the tirade. There is something ungodly about this, beloved. This is not just problematic. What this man has done is created a testament.
Yeah.
He has given us an opportunity to read a book that will speak to what we should believe comes from the divine and give us the strength to cast away all of the things that people have said that God wants, when reality, it's the power structure that really wants those things. All right, I'm going to back up.
I'm going to say this to our audience first before I go back to Robert Jones. And I just need to know, those of you in the chat, and thank you for sharing this conversation. If you have children, tell me in terms of what grade they are, and if they are taking history, what kind of history are they learning? History, social studies, whatever you want to call it. Tell me if you have grandchildren, children that are elementary school age, let me know what they are learning. If you have children that are high school age, let me know what exactly they are learning in terms of social studies and history.
Can I add one thing to that?
Please.
And can you also let Bishop Vanessa know if the schools that they go to are requiring that they have prayer? Are they requiring that they pledge allegiance to the flag? See what they're requiring. Not only what are they learning, but what are they requiring that perhaps wasn't being required? I would be interested also to know.
Yes. So back to Robert. Robert, so again, thank you for that. As it relates to Mississippi, you go to part 2. Again, this is a teaching manual as far as I'm concerned. You talk about Duluth. Duluth, before Minnesota, the lynchings in Duluth, commemoration and repair in Minnesota. And, we know that there's a lot has been going on in Minnesota over the past couple of years. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, I didn't want to just pick on the southern states, even though I am from the South. And, because really this is not a southern story. It's not a former Confederate state story. It's an American story. So I wanted to make sure that, I could have written 50 chapters, one for each state, and told a very similar story here. And so, in Duluth, this is an event that is much less well known, I think, than the ones I cover in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and in the Mississippi Delta. But in 1920, there was this horrific lynching of 3 African-American men who were in town for a single day. They were actually part of a traveling circus that was going through the northern part of Minnesota, and they were accused by a white woman falsely of sexually assaulting her. And as we all know, that's basically the formula for inciting white racial violence all over this country. But it sounds like a story came out of Mississippi or Alabama, but it's in the far north state of Duluth or Minnesota. And, a mob formed. They were arrested, jailed, and then a mob formed, pulled them from the jail and lynched them on the town square, hung them up on the town square. And it was 10,000 people that turned out. That was 1/10 of the population of the town at the time, right? Now, we associate this again with the Deep South, but this is in Minnesota, nice, Duluth. As we all know, right, in Minnesota, George Floyd just down the road, right, from Minnesota. The kind of spark of the Black Lives Matter movement. They're also in Minnesota, right? So again, this is an American story, not a Southern story, and I think it's really important to kind of see that. And then the other thing that happens, again, I'm trying to link these stories of white racial violence toward African Americans and the treatment of indigenous people. Minnesota is also the place that is the largest mass execution in U.S. history. And it was 38 Dakota men who were killed. And what was striking to me, again, kind of heartbreaking, that to find out as I was digging in this history, that President Abraham Lincoln was the one who signed off on their execution, right? And that when he was considering that, he was simultaneously on his desk at the same time was the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. So he's thinking about these two things at the same time, and issues both of them within a month of each other. So it's I think a way of kind of understanding the complexity and the real challenge of our history here, and that even folks that we hold up, right, that we're completely wrapped up in this worldview.
Thank you for that. I want to, this is a powerful conversation. And when we say George Floyd, I mean, there was others before George Floyd, but George Floyd really lit up a fire in Minnesota and so many other things since George Floyd's death. And so I want to answer this question, Bishop Flunder, that I asked. So someone has a fifth grader. History is not a part of the curriculum, and they do require the Pledge of Allegiance. This is in Delaware. This person says her son is in the 7th grade and has no history class. Listen to y'all. And no social studies class. And they avidly learn at home. This person says they have a child in 1st grade. They're keeping close watch on American history. Grateful to have a powerful Democratic county outside of Atlanta and that the Pledge of Allegiance is not required. Brittany Powell says that it's about to be added to Penn State Health CPE curriculum. Thank you, Brittany. And you can share and do whatever it is you need to do. We very much appreciate it. Someone says middle school, their child is in middle school. No pledge of prayer and history. Yes. Very progressive young Black woman principal. Beautiful. 11th grader. Yes, the U.S. history is being taught. Not sure it's required, but still has it. Oh, wow. This is something. Somebody is asking about this being a webinar. So this is good. Somebody says, not children, but my congregation is mostly retired white people. I'm leading webinars on Sand Creek and Wounded Knee, the Bressio program, the internment of Japanese people. They have college degrees and many hold master's degrees, and few have heard most of this history. To your point, Dr. Jones, so Dr. David Alexander says the same thing happened in Lawrenceville, Georgia in 1909. Charles Hale. 5th grader has social studies, but his focus is micro and macroeconomics only. What? Cheryl Robinson says, my grandchildren and not being taught history or social studies. Prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance are not required. And she helps her granddaughter with her homework last night, studying the 3 branches of the government. Deacon Sugarbeer says, Jayla just graduated from high school this past June. She had no history taught, social studies only. Tita and I engaged her in our history. 6th grade and 1st grade, Pastor Pam says, Pledge of Allegiance is required. Social studies for 6th grade, nothing for 1st grade. Yeah, our country is in trouble. I mean, that's like it's not a wild statement. Our country is in trouble when we cannot teach our children. And I know you don't get history till you get to a certain grade. I do understand that. But once you get to that certain grade, whether it's 3rd grade, 4th grade, whatever it is, then they should understand and be able to be taught about the history of this country in which they live.
The whole story.
The whole story, not part of the story, not a little bit of the story, not Christopher Columbus discovered America. He didn't discover America. That's why we have Indigenous Day. We don't replace that holiday, right?
Yep.
I see you, Bishop Sonia. I wonder how watered down are the American and U.S. history curriculum being taught, if it's being taught at all. It's very concerning. It is very concerning.
I'll just throw in one thing from my experience. I have a middle schooler, and he's got the standard textbook that's 12 years old, and on the front of it, it's got that painting of the Spirit of 1776, which is the three white dudes, one with the fife, one with the drum, and bandage around the head, right? And that's again, that's the story of America. But they have added Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's Indigenous History of America to the curriculum. So
Awesome.
he is getting this dated textbook that's got this kind of older version of it, but then they're also supplementing it. So I think there are some, and it's a public school district. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that. Yeah.
Wow. And yes, Naquita, I see that. Naquita is a science teacher, and Naquita says that it's not being taught where she is. I believe this is in Texarkana. And that materials are limited, and even the materials given aren't being taught. And again, she says, as a teacher, the curriculum sent out is not the curriculum taught, and it is based off the teacher. Reverend Karen Coleman says public universities in Florida are tailoring curriculum. Professors face harassment, computer and phone hacks for teaching history they don't want taught. This is serious.
Yep.
Dr. Jones, go ahead,
Bishop.
Bishop.
Add one other thing.
Yeah, sure.
And it is that I am aware that this kind of evil in the history of humankind is not specific to what Europeans essentially did, both with folks within their country, the people like they brought the people from India and from Africa to be their house slaves in England, in the same ways in which the reality happened here in the United States. I'm also aware that there were hierarchical African tribes like Shaka Zulu and other leaders that all look my color, let's just put it that way, and still diminished other tribes and stole their people and stole their land. It wasn't unique to the European realities of what happened to people of African descent or people of native descent in this. This evil is deep, and it's been going on for a really long time. This whole concept of justifying ourselves to take everything that someone else has and to kill and destroy them if they try to stop us from doing it. This is a human reality. Almost Bishop Vanessa and our brother Robert, it's almost a human gene that remains from another place and time. What is closest to my heart is that we have named the divine as in support of it. And that is the history of this nation. It's the history of many faith realities when people did this over and over again. That hurts me. That hurts me deeply. Why blame it on God to justify it and sweeten it and make it all right? When does humanity stop doing this to humanity? When does that stop happening? When does that evil cease to exist? But how dare you suggest that it comes from the hand of God? That frustrates me for the church's sake, probably more than nothing is more wicked than somebody who does wicked things in the name of God.
And it's constant. It's one thing after another after another. It's like a virus. you know, just moving through. It's really disheartening. Before I go to Robert Jones, one of the sisters says, we know Florida and other states are now teaching that slavery was a beneficial system. So it is not just the full history is not being taught, but that they are twisting that which is taught. We're very clear. Thank you so much for that. Let's go to part 3. I mean, this is a good history book. Like, you want to teach your kids, this is the book you want to get this book. Matter of fact, let me tell y'all, this is the book, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future by Robert P. Jones. Please purchase this book. It's very important that you get this book. Buy it for your grandchildren. Buy it for your children. Buy it for somebody that you know is teaching. They got all these banned books. They might be banning this one, but they're not right now. So you need to go on and make this purchase so that you can get this book. The link is in the chat already, provided by Pastor Sue. We appreciate you so very much. And again, we're going to be giving away a copy of the book tonight. Make sure you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers so you can win a copy of the free book tonight. So now we've gone to 2 parts. We've had the Delta, we've had Duluth, now we've got Tulsa, right? Yes. And we know that there's another documentary coming out where Morris Chestnut has directed and is a part of. And so you get into that. You talk about before Oklahoma, you talk about the Tulsa race massacre, and then you also mention the commemoration and repair in Oklahoma. Tell us about that. We've heard a lot about it through Bishop Carlton Pearson because he lives in Tulsa as well. But talk to us a little bit about it.
Yeah, thanks. It is probably the most well-known because there was a 2021 national coverage, the centennial commemoration events of the Tulsa Race Massacre. For those who missed it, it is one of the worst acts of mass racial violence in our country's history. It was over a period of a couple of days, 1921. Essentially, upwards of 300 African Americans were killed at the hands of their white neighbors. Is really a simple way to put it. And the entire African American neighborhood, Greenwood, burned to the ground in North Tulsa. Thousands and thousands exiled and homeless after this event. And really it was very quickly, no one brought to justice, and also very quickly dismissed, and then the memory was really suppressed. And it took decades again to kind of surface this again through a group of local activists who really made it happen. And then it turned into, New York Times covered it. There was an HBO documentary. It really did get national coverage as a way of kind of looking at in a local community, an example, telling the truth. It's a beautiful Greenwood Rising museum, multi-million-dollar museum now that is in the place where that neighborhood was burned to the ground, kind of telling the story in a way that will, there are busloads of Tulsa school children now going to that museum every year, kind of learning this history that it really changes the perspective on the town. But behind all that, again, is the story of so that's the Tulsa Race Massacre. But right behind that is the story that's covered in Killers of the Flower Moon, the book and the movie that's coming out next month that got called The Reign of Terror. That again, most of our history books didn't really cover, but it was a systematic, really attempt to kill Osage Indians who had ownership of turned out to have the ownership of some of the wealthiest oil leases in the country after being put on that land because they thought it was worthless by white people because they thought it was worthless. And it turns out they're sitting on a bunch of oil. And then guess what, right? All of a sudden they're getting pushed off and even murdered as ways to get it. So again, these histories together, and I think the thing that holds it together, I was thinking, Bishop Flunder, what you were saying about this evil, this idea, but and the idea that what justified it was straight up white supremacy, right? It is this idea that there was a superior kind of European version of Christianity and a superior version of European civilization. And those words, Christianity and civilization, got used over and over in overt ways to justify all of these acts of dispossession, genocide, murder. And it was essentially, the argument was the comment from the comments, right? That look, we're giving these people Christianity and civilization. And those goods are so big that whatever calamities they suffer on the way to us giving them Christianity and civilization are justified. That was the logic.
And raping them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Simultaneously. And it really wasn't rape, you know. If you raped someone who was an indigenous person or an African person, that wasn't rape, because they were possessions, and they were also not fully human, and they were also not really looked upon by God as being worthy of much else. And I am, if you allow me, Bishop Vanessa, very interested in knowing. Hold up Brother Robert's book up for a minute again. The purple part.
Yes. We're going to get to that. That's next. Because now, but before we do, I want to make sure that there's a few questions that we want to answer. Okay. So let's try to do that really quickly. Is there any curriculums available to families who wish to formally teach our children the stories which reflect the true history relative to our communities? Dr. David Alexander said there is something called zindproject.org, or maybe it's Zind, I'm not sure, but it's .org. ZINNED project.org. He says it's a great resource for teachers, for parents, and churches who want to develop curriculum for full story race-based education. So I need y'all to write that down. zindproject.org. It's a great resource for teachers, parents, and churches who want to develop curriculum for full story race-based education. So, Pastor Pam, I hope you see that, and any other parent that's out there that wants to know about, and anybody else that wants to know. So we have another question here. This is directly to you, but I'm sure that Bishop Flunder may want to chime in. If looking for the beginnings of whiteness and the use of Christianity to perpetuate harm isn't the true beginning the moment the church became the Roman Catholic Church and Charlemagne restored the Roman Empire?
Yeah, there's no doubt, right? We can go back. We can go back to the Constantine, right, in the 300s. I mean, we can go all the way back, and I think that's right. And it really is this fusion of empire with Christianity, right, that kind of sets Christianity on this road. But the reason I kind of landed on 1493 and the Doctrine of Discovery is I was really trying to think about what's the nearest proximate cause, right, to what happens and what lands on these shores. And I think that's probably the kind of colonial encounter period, European encounter with the Americas and with the kind of western coast of Africa. That period is where Willie James Jennings has done a really great job of documenting this work as well. What is it? It's Christianity and the something in the Imagination. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the book, but if you Google Willie James Jennings, Christianity and Imagination, you'll get it. But whiteness, right? It's the church, right? Then Christianity and those concepts that really start coalescing what whiteness means in a way that we have inherited and that is so operative with us today.
Thank you so much. Two more questions. So in the wake of banning books across America, the issue of critical race theory, has there been any attempts to ban your book, and much needed research and book and curriculums across the country?
Well, not yet, but if you look at that legislation, the one thing that is often named, by name in the legislation is the 1619 Project. as a threat to this other version of history. And that actually should tell us all we need to know about what this legislation is really up to, right? By naming that as a specific example and a threat, the kind of history they don't want taught. And I'll just say, it's just so clear to me that, all of this language about essentially making white kids uncomfortable, right, is just a ruse. Never mind what's going to make kids of color uncomfortable. That doesn't come up, right? But it's all around what's going to make white kids uncomfortable. Because we got a theological audience here, but I mean, James Baldwin, he's shaped my thought a lot, but one thing that has really stayed with me as a kind of person who looks like me and with my background is he was asked one time what African Americans think about white people, and particularly why there isn't more kind of anger and violence directed at white people from the African American community. And he basically said, look, many of us see white people and white Americans as the slightly mad victims of their own brainwashing. Right. So take that in for a minute. The slightly mad victims of their own brainwashing. And he was exactly talking about history here, right? And telling this history of an impossible innocence is what it really amounts to, right? We created a whole vocabulary for it. Pioneer, right? To kind of cover up settler, occupier,
in colonies,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
All of that gets covered up by that. We got a whole vocabulary for that.
Yes, we do.
Just kind of euphemisms for the violence.
And missionaries.
Yes. Come on.
So I think kind of that really is just at the root of it. It just is this denial, and all these fights about history are really, at the end of the day, about truth, and they are, as you've both pointed to, ultimately about who's got what, and who's justified in holding what they've got, and who isn't.
Yes. You were referring to the Christian imagination, theology, and the origins of race. Theology and the origins, and we put that in the chat for anybody that wants to go and find out about it. So here's the last question, and we're going to get right to Path to a Shared American Future. Must we really engage in the importance of religious emancipation and its direct isms and phobias that destroy lives in American society?
All right, say it again.
I'm going to read it again. It was she was taking something off and it was moving at the same time. I'm sorry. Must we really engage in the importance of religious emancipation and its direct isms and phobias that destroy lives in American society?
In this country, I think we do. And I think it's because Christianity, even though, I should be clear. We do have a 28% of the country claiming no religious affiliation. And most of those are former Christians who've been really turned off by the version of Christianity they've encountered here. And there's no churches dropping whose memberships are dropping faster than white churches in this country. So that's worth noting. So many young people are in fact voting with their feet and headed for the exit doors because they're not encountering or they're encountering a kind of Christianity that is wrapped up in this worldview. And so they're really not willing to stay for that. But I do think that Christianity has such a hold on the American imagination that it is really important to unearth this, to address it, and to confess it, because Bishop Flunder, what you were saying about repentance, right? We can't get anywhere near repentance till we do confession, right? And so that's just getting us across the threshold is the confession part. And I it's pretty clear to me that we are just barely, we got like 2 toes across that threshold, and that's it. We're just barely getting started in that effort. But I think if we were going to be clear about, you can't understand anything in this country. You can't understand the racial tensions. You can't understand poverty, hunger, any of these issues without understanding this history. And you really can't understand the truth of it without understanding Christianity's role, and particularly the predominantly white church in being completely wrapped up. And not just, it's not just complicit. I want to be really clear about this. It was not like some white supremacy was some external force that somehow co-opted some pure form of Christianity. It was in the DNA of the Christianity that landed here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just really quickly.
It
Go ahead,
moves
Bishop.
to the idea of let's say an abusive husband or abusive wife, who beats the spouse to within an inch of their life, and then says to them, "You made me do that. If you had done what I asked you to do, if you hadn't looked at me the way you looked at me,
if you hadn't said that,
if you hadn't said that, you hadn't triggered me, you made me do that. Don't blame me." That is the heart of what is underneath this inability to take responsibility. You blame the victim. You blame the victim, suggest that if you let a pack of people loose, they're going to destroy everything. And so they are needed to be controlled. And this is the way you
which
do
is
it.
the road that we're on right now, Bishop
That's
Flunder, as it relates
exactly.
to this election and all of these rallies that are taking place
Exactly.
on all of these, in all of these places, and the same rhetoric is taking place in those places, amping these people up,
Right.
to quote unquote take this country back.
And when you are, or when you have been on first most of your life, it is not complicated from a religious standpoint to think that that's where God wants you to be.
It's like a spoiled child.
Precisely. You've always had it. You've always had it. You've always had it.
Yeah.
So it must be God's will.
And the browning of America doesn't help. Right?
Exactly. And I'll say it again. The low birth rate for new babies in this nation, cumulatively, is much more among white women, particularly middle to higher white women, right? People of color are having more babies than we ever have had. I'm telling you the God's honest truth. There's no slowdown in communities of color for new babies. The folks that don't seem to want to have them, right, are the people who in so many ways are raising this hue and cry about abortion. I find it incredible because I get the sense that the women are quietly finding ways to get abortion. So who is having a fit? It's not the women. It is more than likely the men who can really honestly see that if their women don't or are not forced to continue to have children, let's put it that way, then over time, something that Bishop Vanessa said a minute ago, over time, a whole race of people will no longer be distinguishable. That's essentially, there will be no such thing as white. Now, there probably wouldn't be no such thing as black, because she's right. We can all be kind of cafe au lait. But the loss will be very different. And there's a terror about this.
Yes.
God gets blamed for it.
Yeah.
But there is a terror. Now, I want to know, brother, what are we going to do?
Yes, that's the next thing. So to everyone, again, I told you this book was in 4 parts. And so I love the way you titled it, The Rivers Before Us. The Rivers Before Us. And we want to talk about the search for hope in history and discovery and democracy in America. I do want to also say that Dr. David Alexander has a great book. It's a resource called The Lie of Whiteness. And you can pick up that book at lieofwhiteness.com. It's a great resource book. So, Dr. Jones, The Rivers Before Us.
Right. Well, the first thing I should say is that there is no 10-step plan at the end of the book, right? Because I don't have one. And if I did have one, everyone should be very suspicious if I had tried to put one out. But where I found, and I think I'm like many people struggling a bit with hope because it's pretty ugly out there. And frankly, if I'm honest, I think between now and the next presidential election, it may get uglier. We're in for a rough ride, I think, over the next year. But where I do find hope is in these local stories of people in their local communities who have picked up the ball and said, we are going to change this for our kids and for our children's children. Like, we're going to be the generation that breaks the chain. We're going to be the generation that tells the truth. It really is that simple in many ways. But I hung out with all these communities and interviewed the people who've been involved in this, and virtually none of them had resources. Virtually none of them, were like big community leaders. These were everyday people that many got mad, got upset, were distraught, and harnessed that energy to change things. So in Mississippi, like I said, it was descendants of sharecroppers and enslaved people and descendants of enslavers who decided to work together and change something. It's a really poor community, right? There's not a lot of money pouring into there, but have managed to turn it into a national monument. And in Duluth, it was literally like three people at the beginning. It was a white woman, an African American man, and a Latino woman who just discovered this history and thought, like, why do we not tell this story? And they created this beautiful plaza. It's like this 50 by 75 foot plaza commemorating these men. They did that in 2003, right? So it was well before this kind of recent wave of reckoning that we've been. But because they did that in 2003, when George Floyd was killed and people in Duluth spilled out into the streets like they did all over the country, they knew where to go. They went to that plaza, right? And they had created what was essentially a sacred space in Duluth for this kind of protest to happen. It changed policing in Duluth. Turned out that the chief of police of Duluth, it was his great aunt that falsely accused those men of sexually assaulting her and got them lynched. And he didn't know that story until this truth-telling thing came out. But it changed the way that he led policing in Duluth during those protests, night after night after George Floyd's murder. So if I'm finding hope, it is in these local stories and seeing change at the local level, right? I think that if we only look at the headlines, it looks pretty bleak. But I do think there are really important things happening at the local level, and I'm hoping those stories will keep bubbling up, right? And that people will take it upon themselves in their local communities to create that kind of change as well.
I like what you said. Everyday people.
Yeah.
Sly and the Family Stone had a song out called I Am Everyday People. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take everyday people getting fed up with the nonsense and wanting to do something better for their community, for their children, for their churches, for their families, so that we can have a better America. Without everyday people, we will not be able to do it. It's going to take everyday people to go to the voting booth.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And see what's happening at Congress right now. It's going to take everyday people to say, you all are trying to shut down the government. We heard everything you did and said, and now we're here to vote you out.
Right.
It's going to take everyday people to do this.
I absolutely agree with you. And I know that the news is a series of sensationalism over and over and over again. And a case in point was the midterms. If you remember when the midterm voting came, and the news sounded like everything was going to hell in a handbasket. But the people went and voted. It was supposed to be a red wave, according to what the news said. But the people got beyond that, the sensationalism, and they went and voted and messed up everything almost in the red wave, the truth be told. Just narrow wins, the few that were wins. But a number of people who were so sure that they were going to win did not. And I would say to those that are listening to us tonight and listening to what it is that this brother is saying to us, pay less attention. Listen to what Bishop Vanessa said. Pay less attention to what you hear on the news and the sensationalism that is a part of that. And make sure that you are doing something in your family, in your community, in your church, in your organization. Help to get out the vote. Help people to understand that when we vote, things change. If we have an apathy that says there's nothing that we can do, absolutely nothing that we can do, I can promise you we won't do nothing. That is exactly what will happen. We changed the red wave. We literally changed the red wave. And no matter what people are saying, what they're saying about Trump, what they're saying about Biden, what they're saying about the House, what they're saying about the Senate, what they're saying about the judges, whatever they're saying, if this is a democracy, then you got to put your hand on it. That's what this brother is saying. We have moments of passion and moments of pain. But what we got to find is moments of courage. Let's get out here and put our hands on it. Don't expect, as the old folks say, Vanessa, ain't nobody else coming.
Ain't nobody else coming. Find your tribe. Find your tribe. If your church is, if your church is leaning towards one side and you speaking out and you see that, find your tribe.
That's it.
Find your tribe. Find your people. Get with you some people and become the everyday people. Get out the vote. Redeemed Robinson is a part of our fellowship, and he has a whole campaign for churches. That's right. You can register people to vote. Yes. People are doing college tours, no particular party, but, we got to talk to our young people who have the ability to vote. Do you know that they don't want 18-year-olds to vote anymore and 19-year-olds to vote? They're trying to fix it now so that they can't vote. Like, there are things that you can do. It is our right. It was a right that was fought in blood.
That's right.
It is our right to vote. And so I want us to be able to.
I had a Pentecostal moment on you right
now. This is a path towards shared American future. Yes. There are things that we can do, right? Yes. And so I want us to be a part of the things that we can do. I want us to be the everyday people, those that tune into the Beyond the Gatekeepers, those that will buy this book. That a way to get to the shared American future is to get this book so you can teach your kids. Right? So you can teach your kids history. Yes, he has a newsletter. Thank you, Robert P. Jones. Would you mind inviting folks to the newsletter? People, there's a newsletter. Pastor Sue's going to put it in the chat. Follow him. Follow his writing. White Too Long. I love it. White Too Long. www.whitetolong.net.
Yeah,
man. www.whitetolong.net. All right. And so thank you for helping us today, Dr.
Thank you,
Jones.
brother.
Thank you for exposing the hidden roots, right? And then thank you for also offering us hope for that path to a shared American future. We appreciate you so very, very much. And we want to encourage everyone to go and purchase the book. Make sure you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers so that you could get the opportunity to also win the book on tonight. We are going to do a free book giveaway. If you go to the links, you'll see the links. Pastor Sue has put the links in all of the chat areas, all of the comment sections, so you can purchase the book. And we want to make sure that you also sign up for his newsletter, which is whitetolong.net. Thank you all so very, very much. Dr. Jones, one last word that you'd like to say to the people about your book or about anything that you feel like that they need to hear.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful for this conversation. This is where the change happens in these kind of conversations and all these local communities. Thanks so much to the two of you for this platform and all you're doing. It's important, really important work. I'll just close. I'm going to close with another kind of word of wisdom from Brother Baldwin. Kind of stayed with me. He was asked, I think a lot of times, what do we do? What do we do? And even in some of the kind of darkest moments, what he would often come back to, again, I think it's just so wise, is, he'd say, well, I don't have a program, but I do know this. I am convinced that we can be better than we are. Just that simple, right? I'm convinced that we can be better than we are. I mean, it takes work, obviously, but I do kind of hang on to some hope there that there'll be enough of us at the end of the day that'll claim that and move forward.
Indeed. Thank you so very much. You all stay with us. We have two things that we want to just leave with you for tonight.
From the blues to hip-hop, African Americans have driven sonic innovation for more than a century. While styles have changed, there's one sound that's remained constant, a source of strength and courage, comfort and wisdom. Gospel.
That's a little bit of gospel. Gospel music is soul. Gospel music is R&B. Gospel music is funk. It's hip-hop. Gospel music is the full spectrum in terms of its sound of black music and beyond.
Mahalia Jackson, what was special about her voice?
She believed every word she was singing, and she wanted you to believe it.
Preachers have style, right? Gospel singers have style, right? Black style in music and preaching is similar because it allows black people to believe that they can survive a bit longer. My mother had gone to New Bethel Baptist Church.
Is God still standing there?
C.O. Franklin would preach and then Aretha would sing. Oh my God, if you ain't got the spirit then, you dead.
The sermon becomes the song. The song becomes the sermon.
God, we ask that you would reinvigorate somebody.
It's almost as if there's a soundtrack in a church setting.
Amen, brother. That was beautiful. For generations, gospel music and preaching have formed the bedrock of the black religious experience.
The sound still connects people. The sound still gathers people.
These astonishing art forms, carrying an enduring tradition, continue to evolve. Do you think there will always be gospel music 100 years from now?
I don't see how we can thrive without gospel music.
That's right.
I say it's going to always be there forever.
Listen as we tell the story of how a people learn to sing the Lord's song in a strange land. This is the powerful story of gospel.
We are, so I have to say that for those of you that didn't recognize, we do have Bishop Flunder and Mother Miller that are in that documentary. I wanted to make sure that we said that. Also, we see a little appearance of Pastor Ann in there as well. And so this is going to be a very, very powerful time. And so we're going to go right back to that last one. And Bishop Flunder, we want you to do that one.
God bless each of you that joined us this evening. Beyond the Gatekeepers has done an enormous amount of work, opening hearts and minds, reaching out to these incredible authors who I believe Spirit has sent into this time to speak truth to power. And we want you to consider tonight supporting our broadcasts by sending a donation via Cash App to $TFAM Annual, TFAM ANNUAL, or to PayPal, www.paypal.me/ TFAM Justice. Join the family. Be a part. I declare that God has called us for this time to change history and herstory. God bless you is my prayer.
Thank you all so much. We're about to do this giveaway. And so if you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers, then you can win it. Now make sure you put the S at the end, because I'm already looking and I can see folks, you don't have it spelled right. Hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers with an S, so that you can win a copy of this book on tonight. All right, Pastor Sue, let's see who our winner is. Miko Bo. Miko, congratulations. Miko was watching on YouTube. Miko is a consistent person who is always watching us on a weekly basis down in McDonough, Georgia. Miko, make sure that you put down your full name and address. We say congratulations to you tonight so that we can get that book out to you. We'll get that address to Robert's team, and then they will get that book out to you. Thank you all so much for joining us on tonight. Please join us on next week. We have Courtney Pace, PhD, and she has a book called Freedom Faith, The Womanist Vision of Prathia Hall. And so we're going to be here on next week. We want you to join us with her on next week. Thank you so much, Dr. Robert P. Jones. We appreciate you. Thank you, Beyond the Gatekeepers audience. We appreciate you. We say God bless you, and we'll see you next week.